Good evening, everybody. Buenas tardes. It is an honor and a privilege for me to be here with you in Casa Asia Madrid, my home, for more than 5 exciting and fruitful years of my diplomatic career. Well, I would like to express my gratitude to Casa Asia and Emilio de Miguel, director of Casa Asia Madrid, for inviting me to give these introductory words in this dialogue on India and the Indo-Pacific, and also to Ambassador Dinesh Patnaik, Ambassador of India to Spain, who has accepted to take part with Ambassador de Miguel in this activity devoted to the Indo-Pacific region, a dialogue under the title India and the Indo-Pacific. Both are experts in the subjects of the area, and I'm sure that today's activity will be enormously interesting and enriching. And also, Rubén Campos, it's a pleasure seeing you after 5 years, and you are also an expert. Today, Ambassador Emilio de Miguel is participating with a different hat as Ambassador of a special mission for the Indo-Pacific at the Ministry for Foreign Affairs, European Union and Cooperation of Spain. The European Union and several countries in Europe have already designed their strategy frameworks for approaching the Indo-Pacific, and Spain is also eager to participate on it, working closely with India. We are truly looking forward to hearing the vision of the Spanish ambassador, enlightening us on how Spain and Europe understand the Indo-Pacific and the role of India on it. And also we are looking forward to hearing Ambassador Patnaik, who will help understanding India's strategy for the Indo-Pacific. India is a country where I have lived and which I still have a strong personal connection with. I'm very happy being here. Well, going back to the subject, the Indo-Pacific is central in the nowadays geopolitical arena, not only from a maritime and security perspective, but also from other key aspects like connectivity, supply chain, sustainability, and innovation. The Asian regional architecture rests upon the Indo-Pacific as its major spine, and the Indo-Pacific represents the world's economic and strategic center of gravity. India is undoubtedly playing a key role on the Indo-Pacific from a security approach with the Quad alongside Australia, Japan, and the United States, and also from an economic one with the I2U2 alongside with United Arab Emirates, Israel, and United States. Well, the pandemic has undoubtedly accelerated the importance of the Indo-Pacific from many perspectives. The Indo-Pacific is home to the world's fastest growing economies, represented 62% of global GDP, and the second largest destination of EU exports, with 4 out of the top 10 EU trading partners. China's complex and demanding regional agenda will indeed be monitoring the Indo-Pacific, not from afar. But I would like to underline that during the second semester of 2023, exactly September the 9th and the 10th, India will host the G20 summit. In fact, India will assume the presidency of the G20 since next 1st of December. And Spain will assume the presidency of the Council of the European Union in the second half of 2023, creating opportunities, partnership in the region. All this topic, I'm sure that will be raised, but by our good moderator, Rubén Campos. I still underline that you are expert in these subjects. But finally, I would like to take this opportunity to talk about my book, so to announce the launching of the Spain-India Observatory by the Spain-India Council Foundation as a spin-off of one of our lately leading projects, the flagship report Spain-India 2020. This Spain-India Observatory will become a space for analysis, dialogue, and reflection on Indo-Spanish relations. And 2023 will be devoted by the Spain-India Observatory to the Indo-Pacific, including several dialogues on different matters. So you are all invited to its launching next December the 14th with one of the leading geopolitical experts from India, Professor Raja Mohan, with a key speech on Europe and the Indo-Pacific, a vision from India, followed by several activities. Raja Mohan, it's not the first time he will come to Spain. He was in 2012, and well, this one I underline is a very important expert in this area. In any case, underline that India is a country, rather a continent, a key country in the Indo-Pacific and an area of the world full of challenges. I leave the floor to Rubén Campos, the moderator, and thank you to all of you for participating today, and especially having another activity related to India in the premises of the Indian Embassy, organized by the Institute of Indology. So seeing you, all of you here, just show the importance and the interest of India in Spain, and these activities showing how India is important for Spain, having two activities at the same time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, and it's a pleasure to see you, and of course for the interest of the work about India in Spain, your new position in the Fundación Consejo España-India and the other Fundación Consejo who are focused on Asia issues is a very welcoming news. And I must say that I'm very excited to be here. I'm Rubén Campos, I'm Programs Coordinator at CLAD de Madrid, and I also a Senior Fellow at El Real Instituto Elcano, working on issues related with India. And I think we are in the best place, Casa Asia, and thank you for the invitation, Emilio, Ambassador, because this is the perfect place to discuss India. And as Ambassador Moreno has been explaining, it's a key moment for a concept that is, I will say, in the making, the Indo-Pacific. This is a relatively new concept in the context of international relations, who is in the making, as I say, because it depends a lot of what the key actors in the region and in the world are developing with it. And we have a number of new international organizations or networks. The Quad has been referenced, but there are many also in the region who are relevant, and I hope that the two speakers are going to refer to them. Some less well-known in contexts like Spain, like BIMSTEC and other alliances that are related with issues that are focusing on South Asia and in the region in particular. But specifically, this context of Indo-Pacific is bringing India to the forefront, because not for nothing, I mean, Indo-Pacific is referring to the heavy influence of this new country, but also we need to understand when we are talking about India, it's not just a country, it's a civilization. It's one of the most important civilizations in the history of mankind, and has been leading the world for centuries before the Industrial Revolution. So when we are talking about the emergence of India or China, it's really a re-emergence. They are getting step by step the key position in the international sphere that they used to have over all the history of mankind. So this is very important, and the concept of Indo-Pacific is bringing again the relevance of India in the regional affairs, but also in world affairs. So I'm going to give the floor to the two speakers. They are going to formulate some ideas. Ambassador de Miguel will focus on the relevance of this region from an European perspective, and Ambassador Paknaik is going to focus on the role of India, of course. So after that, we hope to have an exchange with all of you. So questions or reflections will be welcome from the floor. I will moderate in this, and let's hope to have a very interesting discussion. So having said that, it's a pleasure and an honor to give the floor to Ambassador de Miguel, who is not just ambassador in a special mission for the Indo-Pacific, which is, by the way, a welcome initiative by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, European Union Cooperation, to give this space to someone who has, in his career, showing a very special interest on Asia, in some posts there, but also in terms of his own intellectual interest. Ambassador Miguel is fulfilling this role, in addition to his role as director here in Casa Asia Madrid. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I think that all of us agree we want a free, open, inclusive, and rules-based Indo-Pacific. The formula is so often repeated that it may become a kind of mantra that can mean whatever the listener wishes it to mean. Therefore, I will try to put some flesh in those bones through focusing on three specific areas: maritime security for freedom, economic prosperity for openness, and connectivity for inclusiveness. The concern for maritime security in the Indo-Pacific arose when, out of the experience in some other sea, very close to the Indo-Pacific, we realized that freedom of navigation and respect for UNCLOS cannot be taken for granted. We have to work hard to get them. Maritime security is an umbrella term. There is no clear consensus about its meaning. Therefore, I will resort to the EU strategy on the Indo-Pacific, specifically to its sixth priority, to try to find the elements that define maritime security. In my reading, its elements are secure maritime lines of communication, respect to the legal framework established by UNCLOS. The EU strategy has devised different tools to reach this target: joint naval activities with Indo-Pacific partners, as well as port calls. These activities include multilateral exercises, fighting piracy, and protecting the freedom of navigation. The second tool is enhancing naval deployments of EU member states. The template here is Atalanta operation. Carried since 2008 to fight against piracy on the Somali coast and the Gulf of Aden, Atalanta has provided some invaluable lessons. Strategic patience is needed. Results take long to come. Second, constancy is a must. Results can be reverted if the operation is discontinued. Third, cooperation with the riparian government is required. Fourth, almost unavoidably, the scope of the operation will be enlarged with the time taken also on human trafficking, drug smuggling, and so on. In order to make these naval deployments work, the EU has established maritime areas of interest and set coordinated maritime presences that pool naval and air resources of the member states on a voluntary basis. Last February, the first maritime area of interest was established, the Northwestern Indian Ocean. A third principle for maritime security is helping the riparian states to build maritime capacity against drug trafficking, human trafficking, and wildlife crime. In short, helping the riparian states to control effectively their sovereign waters. This is the target of Crimario program. Besides that, we have also the program ESIWA, Enhancing Security in Asia and with Asia, that has security, maritime security as one of its components. Ideally, maritime security should be incorporated to all the instances of the regional architecture dealing with security and defense issues. Examples are the ASEAN Defense Ministers Meeting Plus, the East Asia Summit, or the Indian Ocean Naval Symposium. Freedom of navigation and the free disposal of their own territorial waters for the riparian states, according to UNCLOS, are a good example of what we mean when we speak of a free Indo-Pacific. In relation to openness, I would like to refer to the trade architecture. Since before the pandemic, there was an ongoing trend to protectionism. This trend has only confirmed during the post-pandemic. Worse still, other ills have emerged: the decoupling of economies and value chains, the formation of trade blocs, and an uneven playing field. EU keeps on believing on open economies and free trade. We have already free trade agreements with the Republic of Korea, Japan, Singapore, and Vietnam. We have recently concluded the negotiation of an FTA with New Zealand, and we expect to finalize the FTA with Australia next year. We bet on establishing a strong trade relationship with India. In May last year, the EU and India agreed to resume trade negotiations and also to launch negotiations for separate investment protection agreement and an agreement on geographical indications. As we believe in a rules-based order, we also believe that free trade doesn't mean free leeway for economic agents to do whatever they please. For us, free trade must go accompanied of proper environmental, human, and labor standards. The EU wants to ensure that companies behave in a responsible way, a way that is responsible to the societies where they work. In this respect, we regret that the RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership that entered into force last January for the sake of consensus, didn't include labor and environmental rules. On the other side, we have the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework unveiled last May by President Biden. The IPEF, on its side, intends to establish high standards for the 21st century, but it's not the equivalent to a FTA. It doesn't ensure the access to the American market. So currently, the better offer in the market may be the European FTAs. Finally, I go for the concept of inclusivity. The EU strategy doesn't go against anybody and is ready to partner with any willing country. I would distinguish different categories of partnerships. We have strategic partners, then we have ASEAN. In a third level, we have countries with which only a part of the EU panoply of tools and programs applies. And finally, we have China, which is a category in itself. EU strategic partners in the Indo-Pacific are Korea, Japan, India, and China. Although it is not a formal strategic partner, we could add Australia to the list. Strategic partnerships involve an increased level of dialogue, collaboration, and coordination, or at least attempts to coordinate, in areas such as human rights, security and defense, trade and investment, culture, and education and environment. Among these strategic partners, I want to make a special reference to India. The EU strategy for the Indo-Pacific grants a very important place to India. No less than 14 times India is mentioned in the strategy. The EU expects much of partnering with India in trade. FTA negotiations have resumed, and further negotiations, as I mentioned, are on the offing. Digital partnerships are one of the priorities of the EU strategy, and India is one of the 4 countries in the Indo-Pacific, the other 3 are Korea, Japan, and Singapore, where perspectives are more promising in this area. In May 2021, the EU and India agreed to strengthen the cooperation on emerging digital technologies such as supercomputing for public health and climate, quantum technologies, 5G, and beyond, artificial intelligence. In that respect, as I mentioned, India is for us one key partner in the Indo-Pacific, and a key partner that we expect to develop even further the relations in the coming years. At the beginning of my intervention, I mentioned maritime security and the EU's intention to become a security provider in the Indo-Pacific. In both respects, India is a key partner. Another area of partnership is human security. Cooperation on pharmaceutical production and biomedicine, as well as collaboration on extreme weather modeling, are being pursued. Beyond the strategic partners, we have ASEAN and its member states. The EU has been a dialogue partner of ASEAN since 1977. This December, the EU and ASEAN will hold a summit in Brussels to celebrate the 45th anniversary of the dialogue. Besides, European Union and ASEAN have adopted the action plan for the period 2023 till 27, where, among others, have agreed to enhance their strategic dialogue and deepen the political and security cooperation and strengthen their cooperation in transport, energy, digital economy, and technology. Recently, the EU-ASEAN Comprehensive Air Transport Agreement, the first region-to-region air transport agreement ever, was signed. On the strength of such multifaceted relationship, the EU supports the centrality of ASEAN on the regional architecture. We believe this centrality has helped to bring peace, stability, and development in the region. And it has established dialogue mechanisms that have contributed to diffuse tensions and promote understanding among the great powers. I do hope to have showed to you that the expression free, open, and inclusive Indo-Pacific is not a hollow expression. It's not the typical diplomatic expressions that that sounds very, very big, but at the end of the day has no content on it. In this case, the free, open, and inclusive Indo-Pacific has a real content inside. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And it has been quite extensive and concrete intervention, which has helped open many issues, no, of trade, partnership, or maritime security, which has concrete examples, no, how this can be applied to the Indo-Pacific region. So before moving into debate, no, and trying to define what are the implications of some of these issues, and you have introduced, I mean, what I would call the panda bear, no, on the room, not the elephant, because the elephant is Indian, of course, which is in China, no, and their role, and of course is, I mean, not something that escape anyone, that when we are focusing on Indo-Pacific, is to some extent a response to the growing influence of China in the region, and what can we do about it, no, from the countries that are concerned or preoccupied by this growing influence. But to some extent, India, and I'm going to pass the floor to Ambassador Paknaik, is also quite proud and quite interested in maintaining their strategic autonomy. That includes China as well. So we look forward to hear your views on the question, and then explore the issues with the audience. Please, Ambassador.
Thank you, Ruben, and thank you, Ambassador Miguel, for that exhaustive brief on how European Union looks at the Indo-Pacific. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk in brief. I have a speech, but I'm going to just speak extempore and give you a brief idea of how the Indo-Pacific is evolving, how India looks at it, what is happening. I will not address the panda in the room or the elephant in the room, which is China, but we will come to it in the question answer. So I'll be very free and frank. So when you have questions, you can ask me. But in my presentation, I'll just talk generally about things. And to start with, why does the European Union have an Indo-Pacific strategy? Is it really because Europe is interested, or is it because people are just talking about the Indo-Pacific? Because there is, in the last 10 years, there's been a shift in geopolitics and geoeconomics. The world has moved to the Asian region. It's like you saw the movie Back to the Future. This is back to the past. Because if you look at the past, the World Trade Center was the Indian Ocean. The world traded in the Indian Ocean. The Egyptian Empire, the Roman Empire, the Greek Empire traded with India, with China, with Southeast Asia, and the entire trade went through the Indian Ocean. It was much later, Marco Polo, when he discovered the Silk Route, but that was much later. The Silk Route actually was an appendage to the trade which used to flow through the Indian Ocean. So in a sense, the world is going back to the Indian Ocean. Because right now, if you look at the Indian Ocean has 60% of the world trade moving through it. 2/3 of the world's cargo in oil moves through the Indian Ocean. Half of the world's bulk cargo, minerals, moves through the Indian Ocean. Because the center of gravity of the world has shifted to that side. And so, there used to be an artificial division between the Pacific and the Indian Ocean. In the past, there was no artificial division. When India used to trade used to come from Rome, from Egypt, from Greece, used to come to India, and from India go to Southeast Asia. If you look at Southeast Asia, all the temples in Southeast Asia, you worked there, were Indians. Whether you look at Borobudur in Indonesia, Angkor Wat in Cambodia, whether you look at Vietnam, even you look at South China. All these places were the territory of the trade that used to move, and it was one seamless movement between the Indian and the Pacific Ocean. And so, what was earlier the center of world trade, Indo-Pacific, has now come back to it. We used to call it Asia-Pacific before, but that was because the Americans had termed it Asia-Pacific. They wanted to keep the Indian Ocean out because they had other oil interest in the Indian Ocean. They didn't want to mix it up with their interest in the Pacific Ocean. But they also realized that this is one continuum. And so even today there is a difference in how we define the Indo-Pacific. It's a strategic concept, but the geographical contours is still not defined. How do we define the Indo-Pacific? I always used to joke, the Americans think the Indo-Pacific is between Bollywood and Hollywood. Bollywood is in Mumbai, Hollywood is in LA, And so the Americans think that the western part of the Indo-Pacific is actually the western part of India, which is Mumbai. So from Mumbai to the western part of California is what they used to define. What we define, and which most of us do, is from the eastern shores of Africa to the western shores of, which is Mombasa to Hawaii. So rather than, or Mombasa to, so it was basically the idea was that the Indo-Pacific, and so that's the reason everybody talks about the centrality of ASEAN, because in the middle of this large thing remains the ASEAN, the Malacca Straits, and the South China Sea. So it's the South Indian Ocean, Malacca Straits, and the South China Sea, which is the center of the Indo-Pacific. And this is emerging as the most important area, because everything is happening here. New political theory is happening here. Convergence of all countries. You look at it, the US has been there present for a long time. China is the emerging new power in the region. Whatever we say or do, that is the new power center in the world. How we deal with it is a matter which we can discuss later, but it is the center. It is emerging as the second most powerful country in the world. And so the Indo-Pacific is basically a reaction to the emergence of China. It is a reaction to the emergence of China and the need to involve India in the area to keep the area stable. So I'm not going to beat around the bush and give you ideas that it is all part of economics and trade theory. This is a political reaction to the emergence of China. So this is the Indo-Pacific. And what is the Indo-Pacific? Is there an institutional structure around it? How are we looking at the Indo-Pacific? When you look at it, there is already an institutional structure being created. The earlier institutional structure was that the Indian Ocean had the South Asian, the Middle East, the African countries, and the other side was ASEAN, and of course Japan, China, Korea, Australia. What the Indo-Pacific does is brings together everything from Australia, Japan, Korea, India together into one part as players in this big field. So suddenly with the ASEAN centrality, but with other players. So what are the frameworks that are there? Now if you look back, all this has been discussed from a long time. Where did the Indo-Pacific concept start? It actually started with a tsunami. The tsunami of 2004 was when the tsunami destroyed parts of Indonesia, India, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, that entire area. The tsunami was terrible. And in the tsunami, the Americans and the others came in to assist. And they said, this area is the Indo-Pacific. And in 2006, that was 2004, the tsunami. In 2006, Prime Minister Abe gave the first idea of Indo-Pacific. And the Japanese said, let's form an Indo-Pacific. Countries were not sure of how to react. Even us, India, we were not sure of how to react. We were also cautiously looking at it because there were many dimensions to the Indo-Pacific. We were in a situation where we were having close relationships with China. We were trying to develop a relationship with China and trying to put our differences aside and to work together on areas on which can work together. So those were times when everybody was concerned. And nothing really happened from 2006 till 2016. People talked about it. The Indo-Pacific as a concept grew. But it's only in 2017 that it really became important. When China started becoming a new China. When the Spratly Island problems happened. When South China Sea suddenly saw activist dimension of China. When China started occupying islands, building on them, and not listening to UNCLOS. Because the countries took China to the UN Council on Limitations of the Sea. And when they took it there to say that these things belong to countries, because there is the UNCLOS has certain clauses that you can only have certain areas around islands which belong to you. whereas China claimed that because of the 8 dotted line or 9 dotted line, they claimed the entire South China Sea, which all the countries in South China Sea did not feel comfortable, whether it was Philippines, Indonesia, Vietnam, all of them. And so this is the time when suddenly the Americans and the others realized that we need a concept which can control and bring together democratic norms to the Indo-Pacific. So that's in 2017, the Indo-Pacific has taken off, and now by 2022, within 5 years, suddenly the Indo-Pacific has become, people think it's like the iPhone, you think it's been there forever, but the iPhone has been there only 10 years back. You know, there are certain things we think has been forever, but it's only been recent. So the Indo-Pacific has taken off, and many frameworks have been put together. Of course, one of the frameworks is the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, which President Joe Biden launched last year. This, I'll have to read it out. This helps build trade, digital economies, and sustainable infrastructure, clean energy, all of this, that is the economies of the future. But the economic of the future is also the strategic sectors of the future. What the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework wants to do is to bring an economic alliance among democratic nations of the Indo-Pacific to work towards building resilient infrastructure. In this, supply chains become very important, because during COVID and post-COVID, we realized that the global supply chains which emanate from China and other places are being threatened. So suddenly you wanted to have new supply chains. So there's new idea about the China plus one, trying to relocate away from China. And so India, Australia, and Japan worked together to have a new initiative called the Supply Chain Resilience Initiative. So you have the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, you have the Supply Chain Resilience Initiative, and we launched in 2019, before the IPF, which is our main initiative, which is called the India-Pacific Oceans Initiative. This was launched in Thailand in 2019. This is a very important initiative because it does not want to create a new infrastructure. What it does, it works on what is currently available. So it creates, you've read, I think, Alex Ferguson's book, The Tower and the Square, if you have anybody of you have read. The whole idea is the world was earlier built like a tower. There was one person at the top and everybody at the bottom. But now the world is like a square, town square, where everybody is equal and they have to collaborate with each other. If you do not collaborate, you fail. If you are going to have a hierarchical framework, you cannot work in the world. It has to be a collaborative framework. And so the whole idea is to put together a collaborative framework where every institution works with each other. And so what we did is, we wanted to deepen economic and security cooperation with our maritime neighbors in building maritime security capabilities, intelligence gathering, coastal surveillance, everything. I mean, if I go into details of the IPOI, I'm going to bore you, but basically we are looking at cooperation in all fields with all countries. And we had 7 pillars. And we thought in the beginning that we will have to take the lead, but it became such a cooperative venture. Right now you have Australia, which is leading the pillar on maritime ecology, which is how do you protect the ocean resources. Maritime ecology, Australia taking the lead. Japan in connectivity, how do we ensure connectivity, seamless connectivity. Not connectivity which is made for only particular country, which basically talks about the BRI. How do we build, BRI is the Belt and Road Initiative of the Chinese. How do we build connectivity among nations which is independent of any country trying to control the connectivity? Then Indonesia and France are taking the lead in maritime resources. How do you look at maritime resources? Unregulated fishing, minerals, ocean minerals, how do you look at resources? Singapore is looking at science and technology and academic cooperation. How do countries look at each other? And the UK is looking at maritime security. The US is looking at cyber security. So suddenly you have all these countries as part of the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative looking at different dimensions, which means you have suddenly a lot of activity, seminars, meetings, discussions, money being put in. So a framework is being created. So the Indo-Pacific is not something which is, just talk in the air. It has become something which is now concrete. This is added by other initiatives like the Indo-Pacific Maritime Domain Awareness. Now, maritime domain awareness is some of the most important because an ability to know which are the ships, which are the things going across the Indian Ocean. You know, every day, about 15,000 ships cross the Malacca Straits. It's huge. I mean, it's just, you cannot imagine the capacity of how many ships cross that area. If you look at a light of, the ships going through the area, there are two main channels which go, the 8-degree channel and the 2-degree channel. 2-degree longitude, 8-degree longitude. All ships have to go in one channel. This is for insurance reasons and also for safety reasons, because after the Somalia piracy issues, the Atlanta thing, all the ships go in one direction, and also transshipment becomes easier. But if you look at a map from the top, if you look at a photograph from the top, you will see thousands of lines as if there's a traffic jam going across. And so how do you identify which ship is genuinely a ship carrying cargo, which is a naval ship, which is a pirate ship, which is doing illegal operations, who is doing what? So this maritime domain awareness has become a new thing. And we have an Indo-Pacific maritime domain awareness where countries have put coastal radars, coastal radars, satellite observations to make sure that we know where every ship and every boat in the Indian Ocean is. And so this kind of cooperation is happening. Then the other is the Indian Ocean Naval Symposium, which Ambassador Miguel talked about. The Indian Ocean Naval Symposium brings navies of the entire area together to cooperate. How do you stop maritime piracy, trafficking, crime? There's a lot of crime happening on the seas. We are victims of the crime. You know how in Mumbai, when 26/11, the terrorists came into India, they came by sea. So the whole idea is, how do you regulate all this? Why I'm telling you all this is that the Indo-Pacific is no more just a place of talk. It's a place where we are really looking at concrete actions taking place. And of course, the big initiative for which we are all working is the Quad. The Quad again started like that, hesitatingly, after the Indo-Pacific idea. The Quad started basically again by the US, Japan working together, getting Australia and India in. Both Australia and India were hesitant in the beginning. We were hesitant till very recently. Naval exercises used to take place. We were hesitant. The Australians were hesitant. But like I said, 2017 was a watershed year, in which when the Chinese started becoming aggressive, they came into that time a place called Doklam near Bhutan. So we realized that the long-term strategy we had with China, which was that we keep our differences aside and we try to work together on things on which we have mutual interests, which is trade, which is climate change, business, cybersecurity, all the things on which we have common, and to keep our differences aside, which is border problems, security, China as a hostile neighbor. So all this we wanted to keep it separately. After Doklam, we realized that policy hasn't worked, that our trying to appease China will not work, because China sees appeasement as weakness, not as compromise. And so we joined the Quad very strongly after 2017. And now we are a strong partner. In the last naval exercises, Malabar exercises, which took place in November 2020, during the COVID pandemic, Australia also joined. So suddenly the Quad not just became a group of democracies with common interest and common values, but it also got a security, economic, and strategic dimension. So in the last 2 years, you've seen it evolve very fast again. It's been talked about, but in the last 2 years it evolved. They had a summit meeting. President Biden called a meeting in the US. Tokyo was the summit and in the Tokyo summit, the Quad took a lot of decisions. I mean, I can tell you about all the practical cooperation they have decided for the 21st century. But I'll not bore you with all the details. But the whole idea is now the Quad has become the foremost organization looking at cooperation in the Indo-Pacific region. Now in the Indo-Pacific region, of course, there are countries, and we know which countries, China and some countries which are hesitant about this. But what we keep on saying is we cannot have a veto on choices of others. If there are democracies working together, no other country can have a veto on how we work. And you cannot have a unilateralist approach. a unilateral approach, that I do not like you getting together. We know, and let's not beat around the bush, that the Quad was done to look at how we can contain China. And it's clear. I mean, we can, all of us say good things, but let's be very clear here. This is something which has happened. But at the same time, it is a group of democracies which is trying to bring fundamental values to place. What are the fundamental values? We talked about it. Free, open, inclusive Indo-Pacific. But in that we put peaceful, prosperous. And more than that, freedom of navigation, rules-based international order, sustainable and transparent infrastructure investment, mutual respect for sovereignty, peaceful resolution of disputes, and equality of all nations. The whole idea is to bring the principles and values that you cherish as democracies of these 4 countries to bear on the Indo-Pacific and not allow the Indo-Pacific to be used by any one country for its own purposes. That was the whole idea of the Quad, and we did it. And so this is how the structure is emerging of the Indo-Pacific. Tell me when you get bored, okay? But the whole concept is, where do we go from here? Now, like I told you, the Indo-Pacific is an area of convergence of all countries. Now, within the European Union, France was the main country which started the whole idea of having, because France itself is a Indian Ocean power or a Indo-Pacific power. France has colonies there, from the Reunion Island to the French colonies all over. So France to a large, and they also have a naval base there. So the France led the European Union strategy. Germany in fact sent a frigate in 2019-20 to go over the place. So once France and Germany led the way, Brussels came forward and we have an Indo-Pacific strategy. Now we can discuss later whether the European Union really has an Indo-Pacific strategy, what it is about, but that we will leave it for the question answer. But the Indo-Pacific now has emerged as the main area of the world for both competition and cooperation. Cooperation among the countries is there, ASEAN is there, US is there, every country, every major country in the world, even Russia is there. Even though Russians do not like the Indo-Pacific concept, because they see it as an American-led concept to control the Indo-Pacific area, but still they are present. So you have everybody, and even the UK, which till recently was not present in the Indo-Pacific, but was only up to Bahrain and the Middle East, has suddenly put a aircraft carrier flotilla into the Indo-Pacific. So you have everybody, Germany, UK, France, everybody, US, Australia, Japan, South Korea, India, every country which is worth its power is now focused in the Indo-Pacific. So how do we create a structure where all of us can cooperate together? Because in the end, inclusive means inclusive. When we say Indo-Pacific, we mean every country to work together, including China. Nowhere in any of our statements have we said that we are not open to China joining us or joining. The Quad now has associate members from other side. Nowhere has it been said. Yet, if countries feel that this is an exclusive group or a clique, like the Chinese call us, this is not correct. This is something which you can discuss later on. But, so the main thing of India's policy in the Indo-Pacific is this, is to forge partnerships so that the Indo-Pacific emerges as the central area for global convergence of trade, economic, security, peaceful, where there is freedom of navigation, where people can move across easily, and where standards, global standards and rules are followed. So it's a rule-based order, like Ambassador Miguel said, where standards are followed, whether it's in human rights, whether it's in trade practices, whether it is in how you do business, everything else. It's a place which will set an example and be the driving engine for growth in the 21st century. So I will stop there. If there are any questions, I hope there are questions I want to really discuss, and don't hesitate, you can ask any questions. I mean, you have from the Ukraine war to China to whatever else you want to ask, we'll be happy to do that. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. So it has been a very interesting presentations, and we have a good, let's say, framework for the question and answer. We have around 15 minutes at least for this. So I don't know if there is already an appetite. I mean, have many that I can make, but I will give the protagonist to the audience. So if there is anyone, raise their hands and I can collect some interventions and then go back to the floor. I have one here and two there. So let's start with the gentleman from.
It's a generic question to the panel, but maybe more from the European perspective. So most of the talks regarding the Indo-Pacific strategy and everything, it started evolving like few years ago. So how do you see the change happening in the context of the Russian war? As in, Europe is so indulged in that conflict. So do you think like Europe has that, an appetite or a drive still left to focus its resources in the Indo-Pacific region?
Very good. Let's collect some questions and then go back to the panel. The lady.
My question is something very similar.
Yeah. Can you take the mic? Thank you.
Yes, so my question was something very similar, but I would like to thank the panelists for this very interesting and extremely relevant dialogue on the Indo-Pacific. But again, mine was regarding the Ukraine war and whether Europe, this has changed their view about the Indo-Pacific and what their strategy is in the future.
Very good, thank you. So let me, before giving the floor to the panel, add a question for the ambassador, which is, what is India planning to do with the G20? Because you have been discussing about the Indo-Pacific, but again saying that should be inclusive, and the U20 is already inclusive because there are all the actors, the key actors, including from the region, are there. And you are going to have the presidency in very hard times, following the Indonesian one at the moment. So maybe if then you can give us some ideas that how this could be used for the purpose of the discussion today. So before that, let's go to the two Europeans that has been requested their input about how the Ukraine war is influencing the European position on the Indo-Pacific. Maybe, Ambassador? Yes.
Well, it's interesting. Many people have thought, oh, we have problems in Europe, we should focus in Europe, not in the Indo-Pacific. But the diplomats, the experts, see that there is a direct relation between what's happening in Ukraine and the Indo-Pacific. First, in Ukraine, we have had a clear violation of the international order. The international order in the last years have been in jeopardy. We have seen, for instance, one example that comes to my mind is the South China Sea. UNCLOS has been completely neglected in this area. So, in a certain way, if we want an Indo-Pacific, a rules-based Indo-Pacific, we must also fight for a rules-based in Europe, and in this case it means opposing the invasion of Ukraine. Besides that, now more and more experts, we have realized the world has become very small. It's not possible now to think of different theaters, to think that the Indo-Pacific is very far from Europe. On the opposite, we need a global view. And also for Europe, we want on one side to show we have autonomous, strategic autonomy, but also we want to work with like-minded countries. One of those is United States. In a certain way, we are cooperating in Europe, in the framework of NATO, in helping Ukraine. So I find it very normal to take this cooperation also to the Indo-Pacific.
Right.
There are many initiatives. Europe is not part of Quad, is not part of the AUKUS, but we have many common ideas, similar, we are like-minded, and one, for instance, I can mention is the Partners in the Blue Pacific, an initiative that it was launched by US a few months ago that now Germany and France have joined, and European Union is thinking of joining. So, to summarize, everything is interrelated, and if we want to defend an international order based in rules, we must defend it both in the Indo-Pacific and in Ukraine.
Thank you, Ambassador. Yes, sure.
No, I just wanted to say one thing. See, if you've looked at the EU strategic paper, it talks about generally prosperity, about trade, about economic relations, but it is silent on security to some extent. The main determinant of European policy towards this is economic prosperity. It does not talk about the rise of China or it's threatening the global order. Because if you look at Europe, you look at Europe's security concerns. What are your security concerns? China is never going to attack any European nation or any European place. It's not going to create a refugee crisis for you. China is not going to send refugees across. It is not going to create any problems so the PLA Navy is not going to go through the Chinese areas. It is not going to be a safe haven for terrorists for you. So these are the main concerns of Europe's security. So if you look at in the European security things, first comes, of course, Russia right now. Then comes the Sahel, the Middle East. And then probably comes China much later, number 4 or number 5. Even Latin America is a greater security threat to Europe than China is. So Europe still does not look at China as a security concern. It looks at it as a place for trade, economic independence, freedom of navigation, so that the area can be a prosperity for Europe. Because if you look at Europe's trade, Europe is one of the largest trade partners of Asia. It is not one of it is the largest trade partner of countries as a whole. And so a large part of Europe's prosperity is linked with the Indo-Pacific. So Europe will always look at the Indo-Pacific as a commercial, trade, economic interdependence, soft power, cultural values, good. But in terms of security, they will have to make a change around in their policy to be able to go in and support the US. But I completely support Ambassador Miguel when he says that Ukraine has changed that outlook. If before Ukraine you would have told me that would the Europeans come to the rescue of Taiwan if something happens, I would have said no. But after Ukraine, because the US and NATO and the European countries have worked together in Ukraine that is the European theater of operations. For the US, their theater of operations is the South China Sea. And the Europeans will have to work with them. So I'm very confident that the Europeans will now have a presence in the Indo-Pacific, despite the fact that the strategy does not speak about it openly. The Europeans have no choice because they've seen that if they need their values to be properly ensconced, they have to take the security line.
Thank you. So we are more or less in the time that we have expected to finalize, but if there are a couple of additional questions, Professor, and then to the left.
Well, thank you very much for your expositions, but let me mention two questions here. The first one is regarding strategies, because many times diplomats, politicians use this term very, very badly. Strategy is something very important. It means a common vision of the international environment. Second, what are the means to approach this environment and what are the priorities? And according to the speeches I had here, I am not sure about the question of if there is any strategy for the Indo-Pacific or many strategies. Second, cooperation is very important, but it's only a part of a strategy, a part. And finally, the question of Quad. I am very skeptical about Quad. Why? because the approaches of the four countries are different. India, for instance, the approaches and the means they use for containment are different. If you follow, for instance, the exercises, the military exercises, you will see what happened, what were the priorities for the different actors. Well, taking into account all this, I am very skeptical about, you see, the European Union going to Asia and the Pacific. What are the means? What are the air naval means the European Union can use in this long and wide area? That is, you see, you can put a frigate, but you need also, you see, the support, the logistics, and many things like this. Something that many people and many diplomats don't see. What is behind sending a frigate to an area like Asia and the Pacific? That is not only sending a frigate, that is logistics, that is maintenance, many things that need support and needs agreements before sending anything not for, you see, showing the flag, but for something else. Well, taking into account this, second, strategy. What is the European strategy? Come on. That is not a strategy.
Thank you. Let's collect one last intervention and then I give the floor to the panelists to finalize the talk.
Thank you. I was just wondering, because from my understanding, India is the leader of the non-alignment movement, and he's keeping a balancing strategy and approach towards the West and China. And I was just wondering, how sustainable is this approach in the long term? Because I'm assuming that it'll get to a point in which it's either or. So I guess that's my question.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. So who would like to go first to this set of questions?
Well, if you don't mind, I want to go first because I find very provocative the intervention of Professor Marquina, because really you are attacking my role. If there is no strategy, what can I do? For me, a strategy has three parts. First, it needs to make a statement or an analysis of the geopolitical situation where it's going to be applied. Second, you must check in that strategy which are the resources you have. And third, you need the objectives, which kind of results you want to get. So once you know where do you want to reach, you must start thinking of actions. Which actions, in order which lines of action to reach the objectives you are pursuing. In the case of Europe, the strategy has, I would say, two kinds of line of actions. In some cases, simply it has taken what the European Union was already doing in Asia and in the Indo-Pacífic, has put them together in a coherent way, and has maybe changed the paper which was enveloping the actions. But there are also some new things in this strategy. We want to be a security provider in an security and defense provider and actor in the Indo-Pacific. We want to develop digital partnerships. I think there is also, not only we are focused in the past what we were doing, but also which we intend to do in the future. A great deal of your question was about maritime security. In this respect, something you are right. One of the main difficulties in maritime security, we have had it, for instance, in Atalanta, is what's called force generation. to be sure that the states, the concerned states, pull together enough naval and air resources for the operation to succeed. I reckon this is the difficult part. You have also mentioned the logistics. And maybe this is the reason, as we know, no single European Union state is able to do that. We have this concept of the maritime coordinated presences. And we are not dealing with the whole Indo-Pacific, only with those areas which are declared maritime interest areas. That presently it's only the northwestern Indian Ocean. And I think that rightly we are also focusing in generating capabilities, the capabilities of the riparian states. I think it's a way of partnering and to help them, also to help us in order to create this maritime framework in the region. This maritime based on rules, fighting against common dangers, human trafficking, drug smuggling, and so on.
Thank you.
Good.
Ambassador, do you want to add anything to the... So, Ambassador, you have the final word, and maybe you can introduce the G20 reference, and then respond to the lady who has wondering about
but
the
I want to go to Professor Martinez about, one is skeptical about the Quad. 5 years ago, we were skeptical about the Quad. We never thought that the Quad will ever evolve into any concrete cooperation. But the last 3 years has shown that the Quad has moved from strength to strength, and today has an cooperation which has gone beyond our wildest dreams. I mean, in May this year, you had the Tokyo summit, and this is after the Russian war. It's not even before the Russian war that you can say that people have different interests and they cannot get together. You had a summit. You had the meeting of the foreign ministers. You have a second meeting at Washington when President Joe Biden called it. I mean, to have 4 countries with democratic values come together at a time when the world is facing such challenges is in itself an example of what strategic cooperation can do. And so I'm very convinced that what our skepticism of the last 5 years has gone, the Quad is able to coordinate together. We have regular meetings, we have regular action taken, a lot of money is being put in the ground. You see, at the end of the day, a strategy is of no use if there is no action on the ground, where there is no finances put in, no implementation of things taking place, and all that is taking place. So I would think that the Quad is proving itself, and it will prove itself in the future. It is basically what is happening in the world today, and this relates to the question of the young lady, and I'll come to that, is that the world is moving towards something called multi-alignment. And this is what is strategic cooperation with different countries. So, and this I will tell you. And before that, I wanted to tell something about what Professor Martinez said, about assets, naval assets. Security is not just about naval assets. There are enough naval assets there. When Afghanistan happened, who had any assets in Afghanistan? All the assets reached when necessary. Spain was there, Poland was there, every other country was there. You don't need assets lying there for you to go. Your assets will reach. Assets don't need. All of you have assets. You have the French have 2 aircraft carrier flotillas in the area. The US has 4. UK has just sent 1 aircraft carrier flotilla. An aircraft flotilla is an aircraft carrier with 4 frigates, 4 destroyers, submarines. It's a massive powerhouse. So the assets is not a problem. And on top of the assets that is there of the European countries, you have assets of Australia, you have assets of Japan, you have assets of India, you have assets of South Korea. There are enough assets on the ground if the world needs to send a message. But more than the assets, it's the ability for the European Union countries to work together on economic sanctions, on blockages, on not allowing countries to do what they want if they do something which is against the international rules-based order. And that is where my question was the European Union ready to take the same measures that they took here in against Russia in Ukraine, against any other country which would dare do the same thing in the Indo-Pacific. And I feel the European Union is ready. I don't think so the European Union is going to hesitate in taking sanctions, in taking action, in protecting its assets, in probably delaying, blockading, not allowing their warships and others to come. There will be action. Maybe I'm more optimistic than you are, but I feel it will be. But this brings me to the second question, which see, non-alignment was at a time when we did not want to take sides. So it was the US versus USSR, and so we worked with other countries to say there is always a third way, that other countries have to get to we don't have to be aligned. And that still is our philosophy. But the philosophy now is not to be just non-aligned, but to be something which is called now multi-aligned, which means that you work with every country on issues. See, I'll give you an example, and this is, I'm being very frank here. When Ukraine happened, most of European countries cut off their relationship with Russia. They took Russia out of multilateral institutions. For us, it's been our theory that we are always on the side of peace and engagement. You engage. Even though we have problems with China, you have problems with Pakistan, you have problems with everything, you continue to engage. The world has enough problems which can only be resolved if all of us work together. You know, there are common problems which are there all over the world. Climate change, terrorism, poverty, cybersecurity. No one country can resolve all these problems. All countries have to work together. So you cannot have a situation where you say, okay, we have this problem with this country, so we'll cut off everything. So for India, it has been always a question of multi-alignment. We work with Russia, we work with the US, we work with the European Union, but we work on only areas where there is interest, where it coincides with our own values and principles. We are not looking, it's called strategic autonomy, but I don't like to use that word strategic autonomy. It basically means that you are somebody who is opportunistic. We are not opportunistic. There are certain principles which we follow, and this is that we do not believe that war is any excuse. Like Prime Minister Modi told President Putin in Samarkand, this is not the time for war and you need to resolve it. So while at the time we do not condemn Russia, we send humanitarian assistance to Ukraine. We are one of the few countries which assign large amounts of humanitarian assistance to Ukraine. We are working with US to do the sanctions on different areas. So what I'm saying ultimately is non-aligned has been replaced by multi-alignment, and that is how the future will go. Every country has to see that it has to deal with the world, and it has to deal based on interests. And where it feels that its interests are not being reflected, don't deal with them. But there is no need to shut off the world. We saw what happened when we shut off the world during COVID. When you shut off the world, everybody suffered. We saved people from COVID, but we killed them because of unemployment and poverty and rise of prices. So we don't want to do the same. We need to engage with everybody, work with everybody, and to make sure that the world is aligned into one group. Thank you.